Hi, it's Pastor Andy with our Monday discipleship video, and this coming Saturday, of course, if you're watching this as it's done, this coming Saturday will be Christmas 2021, and these last 21 plus months have been anything other than normal. Nothing that we could have expected around Christmas 2 years ago. Maybe you remember March and April of 2020. You likely remember the lockdowns that happened, or the initial fear that beset not only a nation, but all of the world. You may remember that certain supplies, such as toilet paper, yes, toilet paper, couldn't be found in any store, that people were forced to work from home. And for some that was great, but they were forced to work from home in many ways. People were kept from seeing their loved ones. They were kept from taking vacations. They were kept from even having conversations with one another, etc. But you know, some good did come out of those days. Church attendance skyrocketed, at least online, since we couldn't meet in person. People took time to relax and to spend time with their immediate family members because of the need and the ability that people normally were used to having to rush from event to event was no longer. There was no longer any need to rush from event to event. In other words, the world received a shock. And it wasn't quite instant. We could see a little bit of this coming, but when it hit and happened, it did swiftly. And it was fully encompassing. And then the shock was gone. Some people continued to be gripped by fear. Others began to emerge slowly and cautiously. Many ignored the mandates, and others only followed them slightly. But regardless of your position on the pandemic or on the mandates or in any part of that, the truth is that the world was put into a shock to which it still hasn't fully recovered. And in many ways, it never will. There are things that we used to do that will likely never be the same, and yet newer, greater things that we will do now because of that. And we could say the same thing in many ways about 9/11 or the Great Recession and maybe a couple of other things just in this century. But like the pandemic, 9/11 initially brought that quick, albeit short, possibility of people returning in faith to God, or renewing their faith as it is. But also, like the pandemic and 9/11, merging those two together, that opportunity quickly passed. I can't make any statements saying that the pandemic or that 9/11 or anything like that is directly related to God trying to shake up the world in some way. But I can say, based upon Ezekiel 24 that we looked at in Sunday's message, that He has done those things in the past. And if God has done that in the distant past, He certainly could choose to do that in a more recent past, and He could choose to do it again in the future. The reality is that in the days of Ezekiel, the people may not have believed that they had a direct promise from God. Their ancestors had seen God do great things, drawing them out of Egypt some 800 years earlier. The great King David himself had been dead for some 400 years. So the people began to, and then truly did forget about God. They needed to be shocked in order that they might stand, or perhaps we might even say kneel, before God. In some ways, our time period is much further. Chronologically, we are much further away from some of God's amazing acts that have taken place in the Bible. But through the past centuries, we have seen some mighty things like the Reformation of the church. We have seen some great leaders such as John Wesley and Charles Spurgeon and Billy Graham, just to name a few. But like the people of yesteryear, we also often forget that God has done great things, and His promise to send Jesus is still going to happen again. But this time He will come as the triumphant King. The second coming of Jesus will truly be a shock to many, and it will be a moment of awe to anyone who is living at that time. So as we approach Christmas this year, Knowing all that has transpired in the past, let us trust God for our future and be in awe of the love that God has for us, not just at Christmas, but at each day of the year.